Welcome to the Cognitive Science Colloquium for winter 2025. Today there's a lecture. Tomorrow from 5:30 to 7, as you know, there is presentations for all students at Case Western Reserve University on the nature of the great, illustrious cognitive science program at the University of Zagreb, a leading program in the European Union, which specializes in attracting the best students from all around Europe and placing them into a program where they have internships and connections to industry. Many of you might have questions about the future. You're all invited to come tomorrow to 9 Crawford, which is in the basement, from 5:30 to 7. Light dinner is provided. No registration is needed. Today, our guest is Professor RenataGeld, who is a specialist in cognitive science, and in particular, the way in which human beings prompt for meaning. And her studies have taken her into many different areas of human cognitive, for instance, communication and control. This is not surprising given the pedigree of her career and the folks that she has worked with, including Ricardo Maldonado at Mexico, various people at Berkeley and San Diego, including Ron Lanniker. She has worked, for example, on how congenitally blind people construe reading and respond to forms like language. She did a lot of that work here in Cleveland. She's done it just before. And so she's agreed to come back, so we must be doing something right. Today, she's going to talk about the relationship between meaning and form. Now, of course, no human being has direct access to anybody else's mind. It's all indirect to what you can perceive of forms. So right now, a few photons are hitting your retina, a few longitudinal waves are hitting your ear. Those are forms. That's it. And from that, you derive meaning. You make inferences. You think that I'm actually potentially making sense. So you're putting together the forms, the performance instrument making sense. How do human beings do that? What is the relationship between form and meaning? This is a very hot topic in our era, but it has been for a very long time, since the pre-Socratics. Indeed, in 2002, I wrote a book with Hugh Prunier, whose opening chapter is The Age of Form and the Age of Imagination. That tries to puzzle through the nature of forms and meanings. And it goes into computational forms, computational languages, zoom forward. Now here we are, all looking at transformer architectures, which is a lot of form. It's extremely brilliant the way these machine learning things are put together, but at the basic level, it's a bunch of sophomore level linear algebra, lots and lots and lots of it, and a bunch of sophomore level vector calculus, like gradient descent. It's the manipulation of forms. It's Pythagorean. It's what I thought when I was a kid, that someday mathematics will be shown to be the basis of everything. What's the relationship between form and meaning, and how human beings operate between them? Today, she'll be talking about decoding meaning and form, dialogues between and about human and artificial minds across classrooms and disciplines. Please help me welcome Professor RenataGeld.
Thanks, Mark. The title of the talk is a little bit misleading. So the second part is just the fact that what I will be talking about today, and actually I worked with a lot of these things with Dario, who is the co-author of today's presentation, was based on the questions that my students asked me. And these were in different classes, in cognitive science classes, in language classes, in our new program classes. And most of these questions were about, okay, how do we construct meaning? How do we know that it will be always humans who understand each other and machines will never understand us fully, and so on and so forth. So today is just a little bit of a contribution about language, about cognition and computation from the perspective of language and what language is. I will be asking you some questions, so just to have fun and to kind of get you into the room of what language is, and I'm very happy I don't have linguists here, apart from but the students have, different majors, so this is I think that the presentation will do you good in that respect. In previous class, Professor Turner said something that is quite true. I mean, he said a lot of things in his previous class, but one thing that is quite true, and this is when you study cognitive science, you always study, you want to get surprised and you want to look at things that you take for granted. And then all of a sudden somebody asks you something and you're like, oh, really? Yeah, I've taken this for granted for years. So maybe some of the questions we deal with today will open up some windows into cognition for you guys as well. Okay. Change. Okay, let's see. Yep. Okay, trying to get to my first slide, but we'll do it the other way. Like this, maybe. No. Okay. Okay. So basically today we're going to talk about the nature of learning, a little bit about representation, about of course language and meaning. But I think most importantly, we're going to talk about experience. And this is something that drastically makes us human, right? Something that machines don't have in the way we have. So we experience the world with our whole body, right? With all of the sensory input we get. And so we will be talking about this a lot. To start with an example of that has to do very much with experience and with cognition. Okay, I have two sentences for you here. Someone is throwing away Professor Turner's car, and Professor Turner's car is being towed away. Now, the question is, don't answer, just think about it, whether these two sentences mean the same. I would like you to note down what you think and how you think right now, whether these two sentences mean the same. Okay? Now, you know who Noam Chomsky is? Yes, have you heard? Who heard of Chomsky? Yeah. Well, it's good that you didn't hear about him. I think everybody did it, so it's okay. He's of course involved in a lot of things these days, but he was extremely important in the 50s because he went out with his theory of how language acquisition and language works, and basically how he explained things is that in language you have something that is called surface structure, and then you have something that is called deep. And basically, so you can read on, yes, you see that you're reading what is on the slides. So basically what we have is that we have the syntactic structures on the surface, but then underneath, in the deep structure, we have the syntactic structure and the semantic structure, okay, of what is going on, right? So, for example, here in this particular case with Professor Turner, we have in the deep structure, we have someone who is the agent, who is performing something, and Professor Turner's car is the recipient, okay? The difference in the surface structure is basically derived through transformation rules. And you guys who are computation guys, and all of you are here, you will understand why this is important, okay? So there are specific rules according to Chomsky, although he changed his opinion a little bit and upgraded his theory. But so according to Chomsky and the generative grammar, there are certain steps, right? We need to make to transform the passive sentence into an active or the other way around, an active sentence into passive, okay? So the object, Professor Turner's car in the theme structure is moved to the subject position in the service structure. So those of you who have you studied language in the sense, have you learned languages, other languages? Yeah. So if you open any textbook, okay, it's extremely important to know what goes where and how it transforms, and you know, the object becomes subject and the other way around, okay? So these are such rules, okay? And then what is really cool about this, it says the agent, and that is someone, you know, someone sewing away the student's car is omitted. And it's omitted when it's unknown, okay, when it's irrelevant, and this is when we use passive. And it says, and this is the punchline here, that this does not affect the deep structure. Okay, so it does not affect semantics. Are you following me? Okay, so we have these two sentences, okay, but the fact that we made this transformation from active into passive, okay, so we have two different surface structures, we didn't change the meaning, okay? Now, these transformations basically is something that you know and you call and you've heard of as a rule-based basic symbolic computation, right? So you have symbols that you manipulate, right? There are rules how you do it, okay? And this is a very, very formal theoretical framework, right? And the symbols are, of course, parts of language that we know the linguists investigate. We have verbs, we have nouns, we have adjectives, and so on and so forth, okay? And these are symbols that we manipulate, and there are transformational rules. Now, this is, of course, extremely influential in language acquisition, right? Because among other things, it meant that we are born with something that in the early days he called universal grammar, okay? So we are born, and when we are born, we are basically born with the rule of, for example, subject, verb, object. So we are born with the schema that we know, okay, there's a subject and there's a verb, there's an object, okay? So language is definitely not experiential in that sense. Any questions? No? Okay, let's move on. Now, the bottom line of this is basically that this kind of approach forgets about the subjective interpretation of what is going on, okay? And of course, it comes from the idea that language is rooted in our biological design, that linguistic capacities are wired and governed by principles, okay? So we have this mechanism for language acquisition, everything is all nice and neat, and language reflects these universal principles. And basically what it means, what TG assumes, transformational grammar, that the meaning is given, okay? Now, think about this, that meaning is given, okay? Because we will be talking about this a lot. What did you write for this two sentences? Can you tell me now? Do they mean the same or don't they mean the same? Have you changed your mind or haven't you changed your mind after this little expose about Chomsky's TG? Who wants to say something? Come on. Yes.
I mean, I did change my mind.
You did change your mind?
Yeah.
See, a little Chomsky can change your mind. Okay, so tell me.
Because I mean, at first I was thinking like you know, the active voice is more like blaming someone, or it puts point of the sentence on the person in front of the car. But I was kind of now that I thought about it, it's like obviously like with the passive voice, like obviously there's at least somebody trying to get their car. It's not like that happens in any other like situation, so couldn't be anything else.
So basically, the first punch was, oh, yeah, of course, there's a difference between two sentences, and now you change your mind after this. Kind of, yeah. I like that you're doing this. I'm very, yes, I'm very optimistic about you doing this and not doing like, yeah, of course I change my mind. Okay, anyone else? Hmm? Let's move on. Now, the idea that is a little bit different from what I've just said is that humans are basically conceptualizers. Okay? So the hunch, sorry, Lucas had, the hunch that he had about, yeah, I mean, we have two sentences, they don't mean the same, they're active and passive, huh? Yes, it has to do with us being conceptualized, okay? So, right, there's an object and the subject, and there's someone doing something, and then where's the focus of our attention? Okay, what is salient in one sentence or the other? Okay, what we know from before is also crucial at saying one thing or the other. Okay, so basically, these two sentences carry, I dare say, very different meanings. Although we have been taught at school that it's basically the same thing, it's just that one is active and the other is passive, right? So there is a reason why we say someone is doing that and that. And then, of course, you have to know a lot about Professor Turner's car, where he parks his car, for example, okay? So he parks in a spot that the car cannot be towed away, for example, okay? And things like that. So there's plenty of things going on. And then, of course, generally, the intuitions also how, maybe not about this particular sentence, but intuitions about how the world works. And this is very interesting, all kinds of intuitions about how the world works, including something that is called a physical intuition, are extremely important for everybody who seriously investigates computation and cognition, for example. One of the most challenging things is like, okay, there are these obvious things that kids understand and see and interpret, right? And this is because they have the basic intuition about how the physical world works. Good. Now, let's take another example. And when my audience is at the peak of attention, then it's good to bring in my brother and examples with my brother. So now, my name is Renata and I have a brother, okay? And let's say that I say, let's go for a bike ride, okay? Sorry, that's my brother first, let's go for a bike ride. Then there's me saying, let's go for a bike ride. Now my question is, do these two sentences mean the same? Do they mean the same? Yes. What do you think?
Is it strictly like on based on the way you say it or the way you see it?
Yeah, ignore my intonation. Because did you mean that when you said how I say it? Or
No,
what
I'm
I
saying
say?
like,
Just read them and go, no, yeah,
I would say
just go for everything that is on the slide, yes, exactly. They're different, why?
one sounds excited and oh, very good.
I didn't even see this. There was supposed to be exclamation marks and gold, but good work, good work, okay, so I made, so see? And it makes a huge difference, there's the information. Okay, but let's put the exclamation mark here. I should have pretended I did this on purpose. But I didn't. Okay. You know. Let's take the, okay, we have exclamation mark. It should be an exclamation mark in both places. Okay, do they mean the same? You have to get a little bit cognitive science now, a little bit of philosophical also,
I
okay?
can
Yes.
tell you a bit. So if we are thinking about like the social things around it,
Yes, thank you very much.
then there is assumption that both of them like to ride the bike, or one of them rides because the other person says, or those kind of dynamics.
Yes.
Because they are like siblings, so all those kind of things come into play.
Yes,
So
but even if we don't know that, yeah, of course, you know, because you deduced from this, that
Yeah.
Renata's brother. Okay, yes, so there's obviously, there's something going on about bike being important in their lives, that's what you're saying, right?
yeah,
That's a fault.
if that is otherwise, it's
Okay.
just one person.
Anything else? How can they be different? Let me rephrase my question. Yes, Lucas.
Well, so it's like, suppose it's like a dialogue, right? Like, Renata's brother speaks first, and then Renata responds, so like, the first person speak, is like proposing the idea, and then the second person is like agreeing, and actually like that is different,
Absolutely. If you just, of course, if we did the other way around, it would be the same. I mean, even the order of the sentences is like agency, whether this is intention or whether this is invitation, okay? So these sentences can be completely different in meaning, basically, okay? If we take in the societal, as you say, aspect, and then if we think of this at the kind of discourse level, which comes first. Any other comments?
Well, the first one means Renata's brother wants to go for a bike ride, but it doesn't mean Renata wants to go for it.
Absolutely, yes. And in a lot of cases, this is very true, and I will tell you why, okay? Okay, this is what I already said, because you're very clever, so we don't have to go through this. It's just the unpacking of what we wanted to say. And now, what about a bike ride itself? So if I say a bike ride, and then Mark says a bike ride, and I know what kind of bike rides he takes, basically, it's fake riding bike and home, okay? Or Lucas says bike rides, okay? So is it possible that this construction can mean different things if said and used with different people? Yes, how? Give an example. You're smiling and you know the answer. Come on.
Like it depends on their fairly their.
That?
No, she's just, one of my students.
Okay, very good. Okay. Yes, and I have a very drastic example, which is true. My brother biked from Croatia to Beijing for the Olympics. It's 121 days and 11,800 kilometers. It's a long bike ride. So when he invites for a bike ride, you have to be very careful, right? So basically what is going on is that you have a construction, just take bike, you can just take the noun bike, right? When, for example, with fire language, and then you learn, for example, bike, you also say bike in jargon in Croatian, inside what you can say, it's equal in Croatian, and then you're learning another language and your concept in the way expands, right? There's so much planned in this concept. Information, right? Experiential thing, right? It's there in that concept, right? So when you're talking to the ChatGPT or any other system like this, just try to test. Okay, try to test semantics. Okay, try to play with it, ask difficult questions, ask somewhere where there's going to be very personal thing, but of course, going to be by your personality. That's not good. But something where you can test how it goes about meaning. Okay, let's move on. Now, I just want to make my point because at the beginning I said that I based this presentation on the most frequently asked questions by my students. And basically what I'm trying to do now, and you're doing a great job, is engage you cognitively, but also effectively, right? So this is what I can do with you as humans, right? I can ask you to evaluate the sentences, I can ask you to create, I can ask you to use your imagination. And of course, I'm leading you to draw on all of your human experience, right? To evaluate what is written and what I've asked you and also. So basically I'm trying to nurture very, very, very fundamental human abilities. And this is something that I feel we should go for in the classroom places, especially in the outside, the science classroom, right? So we need to, of course, computation, and we need people who will develop artificial systems, and we need all of that, and we're using all that, right? But listening to each other and asking each other to co-create something and stir your imagination, this is something that classrooms should be all about, especially if they're classes like this one. Okay. Now, I have another case that is, and this is the case, now we're finally on the case of experience. Some of you are here, they think already heard some part of this story, but I would like you now to close your eyes and try to imagine this. So this is countryside scene with mountains, a lake, and the forest. Okay, so could you close your eyes and imagine this? Okay, so countryside scene with mountains, a lake, and the forest. Some of you will be able to imagine it very vividly. Some of you less. It's very subjective experience, psychologists say. Okay, now you can open your eyes. Did you imagine something like this? More or less? Or imagine something that is very different from this.
My forest
Don't
was
be
on the
shy.
left side.
Huh?
My forest was on the left.
On the left
But
side,
the lake was
yes.
in the foreground and the mountains.
Was there, okay. Now, of course, you could have imagined something that is less of a bird's eye view. This is a bird's eye view, okay? Because if you hike a lot, if you spend a lot of time in nature, you have this person who is interacting with nature, you might have imagined yourself more in the beach, okay? But this is something that we usually see with our mind's eye when you get prompts like this. Now, of course, all of this, on all of the representation that we have, that we see with our mind's eye, very much depends on how we model the world, right? What's happening, like we create these mental models because we perceive with all the sensory inputs, then we organize this information, then we infer causes and effects and understand how actions lead to outcomes. And what is really cool, and there was a class in decision making just before this one, we use experience-based shortcuts to actually make decisions. It's not like we have this logical deduction all the time, right? We experience our life with our bodies, with all sensory experience, and we are very fast in making certain decisions. But some decisions, of course, that are like the show that clip from the show that Professor Turner showed is long decision making, but then it happens in a blink of an eye. Okay, so this experience basically intrigued me for years. When I was a grad student, a PhD student at UL, I remember the moment when I got inspired how I will try to prove that experience is really coded in language that we speak. Okay, I had at the time only embraced the cognitive linguistic enterprise. I knew that Chomsky was really a genius guy, but then this kind of nativist theory in which we are born with grammar and there is just rule-based computation going on didn't work for me. And one day I was sitting in a university cafeteria with a good friend of mine, and we were gossiping with other friends. And I remember the moment where 2 tables away from us, there were 2 students talking to each other, and one was sighted and the other was blind. And they were talking to each other. Of course, they didn't have problem communicating. And I thought, okay, so if I have 2 people with such extraordinary difference in very fundamental experience, that is whether they see or not, then it has to show in language somehow, if language is an experiential phenomenon, right? Of course, it is very much counterintuitive as such, because we communicate and we understand each other. But mind you, now we had a little intro of how this works, right? We do communicate and we do share enough meaning to communicate, but we do not necessarily mean the same. And I'm sure you have been in situations where you knew exactly what the other person meant by saying something, and you were sure that's not what you were looking at. Okay, I put here on purpose some kids, and I was actually these pictures were taken around 12 years ago here in Columbus in a school for the blind, because this was one of the stages of the research that I did on the blind. Okay, so I decided to investigate a little bit, although my PhD advisor told me, no, finish your dissertation first and then we will do this, but I didn't say. That's not a good thing, but you know, I didn't, but it turned out to be good, eventually. So I interviewed first, of course, when you start your research, and I'm sure a lot of you will conduct research soon, or you've already done stuff like that. You have to get into the community of people, right? If you work with people, it's very tough, right? And of course, the blind are very close-knit communities. It's very, you know, I'm not blind, I don't have blind friends. So basically, I first conducted a lot of interviews, and I remember one that really changed everything for me in kind of scientific sense. So this young man, who was then in his late 20s, and he was congenitally blind, was telling me a story about another young man who got blind at the age of maybe early 20s, right? So relatively late in life. And he said that one time he dreamt that he was in his father's car, that this human being is in his father's car. And in his dream, he could see all the details of the car, okay? But the person who was driving the car was not there, was not his father. There was a person driving the car, but he couldn't see it in visual terms, okay? So it turned out that the person driving the car was the person who he had only met after he got blind, okay? So you have the representation, you have the mental imagery that is basically the, you know, the synergy of before and after. So this was like, wow, this is amazing, okay? This is amazing. Any questions? Okay, let's move on. And then I thought, okay, let me just investigate what is like, okay, so we have this representation, we have mental imagery, we have visual imagery, and it's very interesting. And then I found out in this, you know, early research that for decades, psychologists thought that the blind actually dreamt in visual terms, even though they didn't have the perceptual, you know, sensory input that is visual, which is now when we think about pretty strange. I mean, how could that be, right? So, and then there was other research done, and then these two people are very important. They basically found evidence that yes, we have visual imagery, but we also have mental imagery. And when we talk about the blind, we're talking about mental imagery, that is the synergy of all the input, sensory input that you get as a blind person, right? You have auditory input, you have mental representations of it, you have tactile exploration of the world, and so on and so forth. And this is also extremely interesting, and this is that for people who get blind later in life, they kind of start losing this visual imagery they had when they were still sighted. Once the sensory input stops, basically the image is fade. Okay, and this is something that's pretty fascinating about how our mind works and what we can keep, and how much experience is important in how we imagine things, how we create things, and so on and so forth. What is really interesting is that, and this is what often students ask me in a class on language of the blind that I teach, and conceptualization of the blind. What about the language they use, right? What do they mean when they say, see you later, or look at that beautiful this and that, and so on and so forth? Yes, I mean, they definitely use these words, and they label all sorts of phenomena as visual, although the conception of these phenomena derives from descriptions of the other sensory inputs, right? But they use it. The problem, of course, is that when we talk about linguistic meaning and we talk about language, then for decades, the use of these visual terms was basically viewed by traditional linguistics as psychopathological. So they would say they cannot use the verb see and look, and that these things mean what they mean to the psychic. Okay, so there was a lot of I would say politically correct and discriminatory things going on in terms of how the language of the blind by the blind was used and constructed. Now, again, this is a very objectivist view of the reality, right? So it means that, you know, you have the verb see and you have the verb look, and they have the stable meanings, okay, stable meanings. And then the blind, when they use it, they're basically like taking from us sighted people and they use it with that meaning. It doesn't happen like that. And actually, people who did one of the most fascinating research on the blind had all the data in the world that they collected from the girl named Kelly, and she was the whole book was written about this research. And for some strange reasons, since they came from a very specific traditional nativist perspective, they interpreted the data in a very interesting way. So they had all this data, but they didn't interpret this as meaning being subjective. They, of course, had all this data, they described it, but they didn't make conclusions that I would, for example, make. So check this out. So they had the girl that they followed and researched. So she was blind, congenitally blind, and of course they had a control group with sighted kids who were, in most of the experiments, of course, blindfolded, and then they get all kind of directions, do this, do that, and of course it pertains to this visual language, right? The verbs and so on. So, for example, see this, we have these two famous, basically, pictures in which you have a sighted child blindfolded and you have Kelly, okay? So when Kelly was told to look up, she actually responded by raising her hands. Are you following me? Okay. And the sighted kids just turned their faces upward when they were blinded. Okay, so look up for them was okay. Imagine we were blindfolded and then somebody tells you look up, you do this, you just put your hands up. Okay, so what is pretty fascinating here is this very subjective and dynamic meaning that is there for them. Okay, both of them, for the group that was blindfolded and Kelly. And this is also pretty cool. So for Kelly, touch meant contact, whereas look meant explore. So if you said to Kelly, okay, look at the table, so she would basically do this, right? And then yeah, so this subjectivity of the meaning and everything, and this was actually before my research, I was just blown away with how they interpret the data that they had and how I would interpret and what would that mean for further research in the language of the blind. Okay, now I will not talk about this research, I don't have time, but if you're interested in reading about the language of the blind and the research that, in a way, I think provided some evidence that the blind have a different language, then you can read this paper from 2014. But basically, the basic idea was, and this is why I asked you to imagine this. One of the instruments was basically this kind of question. I asked the blind people to gently blind to imagine this scene and then describe it. And of course, I had my research questions and hypotheses based on how will cognition work and how will cognitive processes be coded in the language when you have subjects with a completely different experience. So if you're interested in that, and then it can kind of prompt some other questions for you, you can go and try to read it. Okay, now in this last part of the presentation, I will try to kind of further make my case about humor experience and then the question of what kind of computation is cognition, right, from the perspective of language. Now, very often you hear that, you know, you will go to, I know, Germany now and you will pick up some language, right? Or you will pick up a dialect, you know, you hang out with people who have a particular dialect, and then you will pick up. Now, what is it that we really pick up? What is it that our brain recognizes phonetically? Okay, so you have, like, I gave two examples here. You have a jingle on the radio or Spotify or somewhere if you don't have a, you know, premium subscription, and then the things. And your brain really recognizes this. This is pattern recognition, right? And it happens with imagery, it happens with jingles, you know, with auditory things, it happens with text structures, it happens with all sorts of things. They simply get stuck in our mind. However, with meanings, really, there is plenty of negotiation going on, right? It doesn't really happen like this. So it's not like we can just pick up meanings. And it's very interesting when you have a form and you have meaning. Now imagine you read something in your own language, you have a text, and there is a word that is new to you. And what do? What? Okay, you can of course Google it and ask ChatGPT what it is, but let's say that you're reading a novel, okay, and you don't want to Google every word you're learning a new. What do you naturally do when you come across a word you don't know? What does your mind do? Physically. Yes, what does that mean? With the context? I mean,
Whatever's around that word.
yes. You first of all you stop, right? I mean, and this is very interesting. No, but this is yes, but this is absolutely. You look at the context. You actually look at what comes after and what came before, right? So and this is negotiation of meaning immediately, right? You're like, oh, okay, let me figure out what's going on here, right? So there's plenty of this because, of course, we construct the meanings, right? It's not like syntax, or it's not like morphemes that we catch, or orthography, whatever we have that is more of a pattern recognition. Okay, now, if you're interested in language learning as a data-driven and emergent, which I feel very strongly about. And I've just given you here some tribes that work with these different people. So it's from computational linguists to cognitive linguists, and you have people who work, applied linguists who work with complexity theory, emergent dysfunction linguists. All of them basically say, well, yes, language is learning is data-driven and it's emergent, right? So it's not all rule-based, and governed experience plays a very, very important role. And then to kind of sum up, now, what does it mean if we say that structural irregularities emerge from the speaker's lifetime analysis of the distributional characteristics of language input? And we are in a very good class to answer this, okay? So forget about Chomsky, and I hope you have, although I don't want you to get me wrong. Rule-based transformational things are very important to me, okay? It's just what kind of rules and how things happen, that's another story, but we can talk about this in another talk. But what does that mean, structure that is merged from speakers? What kind of lifetime analysis of this? What does that mean? What does that mean? Give me an example. What does that mean? So this is like typical, statement that somebody that works, for example, with young people. Yes.
It's like, scratch the language, and then part of the, their entire life. Trying to figure out like, the structures, like, that. Using, like, expression.
Yes, and in a particular context, but what about the distributional type of things? What's that? So, what if I ask you now, so you're not linguist, which is fantastic, okay? And I ask you, okay, so how do you, you know what past tense is? So I ask you, so how do we form past tense? That's one. Or ask you, when do we use past? I'm foreign, I don't know. And I want you as native speakers to tell me, what does your mind do in that moment? What does your mind do? Tell me, what does your mind do when I ask you, okay, so how do we use this past tense? Can you describe what look into your mind and tell me, what does your mind do? This is a cognitive science class. Yes. Yes. Okay, so you're giving me the, already the rule, okay? How did you get to it? I love it. That's very good. It means you're not a linguist. I need to say, yeah, you would remember the textbook and the grammar book where you read it. But how did you get to the EDD and all the How? What did your mind do? You don't know.
I didn't like learn, I learned it in my language, different language, but I was like, I'm Spanish. And then
Okay, so you raise your awareness to another language. Okay, that's, yes.
It's kind of funny because, we classically say add ED, but your example at the beginning said, Turner's car is being towed. Tow would be a past tense, but you're still in the presence. So like the distribution part is where it's not always that use, but frequently it is.
Okay, but this ED is not past tense. Yes. And that makes things difficult, right? Because, symbolically ED has more than one meaning, okay, as a one thing. So it can be participle, right? Yes?
I found a difference in skills, and then
So we are mind, so I'm just reviewing what you said perfectly. So it's like I just trying to think of the cases where I would use it. Okay, so we go with this, and then we go with that, and then okay, so this is this, and I can use this, and we're doing that one, right? So this, and then if you combine with what you said, okay, I'm really that is just from you, you can have it said at the beginning, it's really happening, and something else that it's doing, and you're basically extracting the rule. So what you're doing is like you're thinking of all the usage events, right? And you are giving me the basically the linguistic category, you're describing it. Okay, so we have now all these linguistic structures and all these categories are basically built up from a definition of a specific utterances on a specific occasion use, right? We know exactly when and how we use it, and we can actually produce the rule. Now, all of these units, whether they're very specific, for example, a noun, table, whatever, they're very schematic, and that's the grammar, okay, very schematic. They basically do conceptualization, right? So when you learn another language, you learn Spanish, and you're like, this sounds so funky, it's not like the English. It means like they obviously conceptualize something different, and it's very nicely coded in the language, we speak. Okay. So to conclude, and this is my last slide, and they're all extremely happy because of that. We cannot separate language from general cognitive processes from our cognition. So there you have this holy triad that you have language, cognition, and experience, right? And whatever you do with cognition, you basically, with language, you basically go with an embedded in cognition, and then you have to take into consideration the vast experience that human beings have, right? And then, for example, depending on our attention, focus of our attention, our experience, and knowledge of the world, that can have to help, you know, when in the case of Professor Turner's car, Professor Turner's car gets its meaning, right? It means something to him, it means something else to me, and being towed away means one thing, and someone is doing that, and he will be punished, means something else. Okay. That's all. Thank you, guys.
Perhaps you'll stop sharing the screen.
Yes, I will.